and would not alter the classification of a pistol or other firearm.
Firing rapidly, almost at the same rate as a machine gun, and that's why these will be banned starting tonight.
It has an overwhelming impact on law-abiding citizens exercising their Second Amendment rights.
That's not how it's supposed to work in our great country. Congress writes the laws and the executive branch enforces them.
The industry has been selling these perfectly legal, millions of them being sold.
Bump stock ban. The case in question, Garland versus Cargill, revolves around the legality of bump stocks, devices that enable semi-auto arms to mimic fully automatic arms. Under federal law, civilian ownership of mash guns is restricted, defined as arms capable of firing multiple shots automatically with a single pull of the trigger. Bump stocks, by exploiting the recoil of an arm, allow for rapid firing without technically altering the internal mechanism of the arm. The legal challenge arose after the Trump administration implemented a ban on bump stocks following a mass slaying in Las Vegas, where a gunman used such a device to slay and injure many. However, the interpretation of existing federal law concerning mash guns became contentious. The key question is whether the definition of a mash gun, which references a single function of the trigger, encompasses bump stocks. Lower courts have been divided over this issue, with varying interpretations based on the wording of the law. Some judges have argued that a single function of the trigger should be understood as a single pull of the trigger from the shooter's perspective, suggesting that bump stocks indeed fall under the definition of mash guns. Others have adopted a narrower reading, emphasizing the absence of a mechanical alteration to the arm's trigger mechanism. During the Supreme Court argument, Justice Amy Coney Barrett expressed sympathy for the government's position, signaling potential support for upholding the bump stock ban. Her engagement in the discussion suggests a willingness to break from partisan divides on the issue, which could have significant implications for the outcome of the case. Chief Justice John Roberts also offered insights, indicating skepticism towards one of the arguments presented by the ban's challengers. However, the justices' questions did not conclusively reveal their positions, leaving uncertainty about the final decision.
While a firearm so equipped would still be regulated by the Gun Control Act,
the industry has been selling these perfectly legal, millions of them being sold.
This ruling has effectively, and for now at least, killed ATF's pistol brace
and would not alter the classification of a pistol or other firearm.
Your right to own a gun can also be restricted.
Barrett's inquiries delved into the technical aspects of bump stocks, reflecting a thorough examination of the device's function and its alignment with existing legal definitions. Roberts, while showing some skepticism toward the challenger's arguments, remained reserved in his commentary, leaving room for speculation about his ultimate stance. Given the complexity of the legal issues at hand and the divided nature of the lower court's rulings, predicting the outcome of Garland versus Cargill remains challenging. While Barrett's apparent inclination towards upholding the ban offers a potential indication, the ultimate decision may still hinge on the broader legal principles at play. The case underscores the broader debate over arm control in the U.S., with bump stocks serving as a focal point for discussions on arm regulation and public safety. The tragic events in Las Vegas underscores the potential dangers associated with these devices, prompting government action to restrict their availability. However, legal challenges have arisen, highlighting the complexities of interpreting existing arms laws in the context of evolving technology. Ultimately, the Supreme Court's ruling in Garland versus Cargill could have far-reaching implications for gun regulation in the U.S. Depending on the outcome, it may shape future efforts to address the use of bump stocks and similar devices, impacting public safety measures and the interpretation of federal arms laws. As the case unfolds, it will remain closely watched by advocates on both sides of the arm control debate, with the potential to influence policy and legal precedent for years to come. Supreme Court bump stock. In the bump stock context, the government and arm control advocates argue that when Congress banned mash guns, it intended to cover devices like bump stocks that allow arms to function as fully automatic arms. They contend that bump stocks essentially circumvent the purpose of the ban by exploiting a technicality in the language. On the other hand, those challenging the ban, including arm rights groups and some legal scholars, argue that if Congress had intended to ban bump stocks, it could have explicitly done so. They argue that bump stocks do not meet the definition of a mash gun as articulated in the law because they do not enable the arm to fire multiple rounds with a single pull of the trigger. Instead, they facilitate rapid firing but still require individual pulls of the trigger for each shot. The Supreme Court's decision in Garland versus Vanderstock could provide some guidance in this case. In that case, the court looked beyond the strict text of the law to its underlying purpose and legislative history in upholding the regulation on ghost guns. Similarly, the justices may consider Congress's intent in banning mash guns and whether bump stocks fall within the spirit of that ban. Another factor that may influence the court's decision is the broader context of gun violence in the U.S. The Las Vegas shooting, where bump stocks were used to devastating effect, shocked the nation and renewed calls for stricter arm control measures. The court may take into account the public safety implications of allowing devices like bump stocks to remain legal. Furthermore, the court's decision could have implications for the broader debate over arm control legislation.
When attached to a firearm, does not convert that weapon to be fired from the shoulder.
And the implementation of your rule, did Congress pass a law? What changed?
Firing rapidly, almost at the same rate as a machine gun, and that's why these will be banned starting tonight.
This rule redefined firearms with stabilizing braces as short-barreled rifles.
Here's the amount of gun violence that has happened. I think we're reaching a tipping point where we're about to hit desensitization to gun violence.
If the court upholds the ban on bump stocks, it could signal a willingness to interpret arm control laws broadly to address evolving threats and technologies. On the other hand, if the court strikes down the ban, it could limit the ability of lawmakers to regulate arms accessories through statutory interpretation. Ultimately, the court's decision in Cargill versus Garland will have significant implications for gun policy in the U.S. It will shape the interpretation of federal laws regulating arms and accessories and could influence future efforts to address gun violence through legislation. As the justices weigh the competing arguments in this case, they will confront fundamental questions about the scope of Congress's authority to regulate arms and the balance between public safety and individual arm rights. Legal debate. The legal debate before the Supreme Court regarding bump stocks delved into the nuances of existing statutes and the interpretation of congressional intent. Central to this debate was the question of whether devices facilitating bump firing, while not fitting the traditional definition of a mash gun, should still be regulated as such under federal law. Bump stocks, which enable semi-auto arms to fire rapidly by using the arm's recoil to simulate automatic fire, present a unique challenge in legal classification. The distinction between bump stocks and other methods that allow for rapid firing without automating the process became a focal point of the discussion. Bump stocks, equipped with mechanisms like sliding functions and finger ledges, offer a more sophisticated means of achieving bump firing compared to rudimentary methods. Justice Barrett emphasized the importance of discerning congressional intent and expressed skepticism regarding the lack of explicit legislation addressing bump stocks. The ambiguity surrounding these devices raised questions about statutory interpretation and the need for clearer laws to address evolving arm technology. The concept of volition and manual action in firing arms emerged in the discussion, illustrated by a hypothetical scenario involving a tripwire-activated gun. Justices explored whether a single act triggering multiple shots aligns with the traditional definition of a mash gun, which typically requires manual reloading after each shot.
Turns law-abiding gun owners into felons is a result of unelected bureaucrats simply enacting a new regulation.
It has an overwhelming impact on law-abiding citizens exercising their Second Amendment rights.
And that's not how it's supposed to work in our great country. Congress writes the laws and the executive branch enforces them.
To end some of the restrictions, which some people call restrictions, I call safeguards.
This exploration aimed to clarify whether bump stocks meet the criteria of a mash gun under existing statutes. During the oral argument, Justice Sotomayor proposed extending a previous ruling to address attempts by gun manufacturers to circumvent regulations through creative engineering. Drawing on legal precedent, Sotomayor underscored the importance of interpreting laws in ways that align with their intended purpose and prevent regulatory evasion. However, it remained uncertain whether Chief Justice Roberts or Justice Barrett were inclined to endorse such an expansive approach. While Barrett hinted at potential avenues to uphold the government's position without delving into broader questions of statutory interpretation, her remarks did not offer definitive insights into her stance. A significant aspect of the discussion focused on the trigger mechanism of arms and whether bump stocks could be construed as altering the traditional concept of a trigger. Justices considered whether defining bump stocks as the trigger itself, rather than an accessory to the trigger, could provide a basis for regulating these devices under existing laws. This line of inquiry sought to reconcile the mechanics of bump firing with established legal frameworks for defining arm components. Barrett's inquiry into the definition of a trigger hinted at a potential approach to resolving the case in favor of the government's position. By reimagining the trigger within the context of an arm equipped with a bump stock, the court could establish a framework for regulating such devices without significantly altering existing statutes. However, Barrett's brief question offered limited clarity on her ultimate stance and left room for interpretation. Overall, the Supreme Court's examination of bump stocks underscored the complexity of regulating arm accessories in a rapidly evolving technological landscape. The justices grappled with balancing statutory interpretation, congressional intent, and the need for effective regulation to address emerging arm technologies and safeguard public safety. That's all for this video, folks. See you next time.